Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 824, and today is July 31st, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We certainly got a lot of news to get through on today's show, so I want to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to check out my other show, The Kyle Anzalone Show, today at 4:45 Eastern. I will have Kelly Vallejos of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft back on the show to talk about all of Trump's foreign policy, mostly mistakes. This morning, we're going to be going through the news that I've been writing up at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com or judgenap.com. And so a great place to follow all my work, all the shows, and all the articles I write is by following me on at Kyle Anzalone_. I'm about 500 followers away now from 10,000, which would be massive to hit 5 digits. And so if anybody is listening and hasn't followed me on Twitter yet, go ahead and do so. And if not, go ahead and repost my articles and tell people to follow me as well. And maybe we could hit that number sometime in August. All right, first article up here today. The U.S. is buying Ukraine 33,000 modules to create AI-powered drones. So Ukraine will soon receive tens of thousands of drone modules powered by artificial intelligence and resistance to electronic warfare. According to the Financial Times, the Department of Defense is funding the sale. The drone kits are produced by the U.S.-German software company Anzalone. Chief executive of the company, Lorenz Meyer, said the firm received $50 million contract from the Pentagon for the order. Meyer said the company would complete the delivery of the Skynode S modules to Ukraine by the end of the year. He explained the modules are strike kits that allow the drones to operate autonomously. Meyer referred to the system as the next evolution of warfare. He said, what we are providing is leapfrogging what's on the battlefield right now, which is to go to AI-based targeting and swarming. Anzalone claims drones equipped with the module can hit targets 1 kilometer away. Drones have become a pivotal weapon in the Ukraine war. Russia is firing hundreds into drones most night, and Ukrainian President Zelensky has rolled out a plan to build thousands of interceptor drones to combat the Russian salvos. And so it's interesting. Of course, it's easy to say that we developed this system that's going to be resistant to electronic warfare and jamming and other things the Russians are doing to down drones, if it will actually be able to work on the battlefield. And of course, that at some point, these I guess would be drones that would have the capability of being powered by human to be manned by humans, to be not manned, I guess, to be controlled by humans would be the way to say it. But if that is cut off, then the AI power Skynode modules would take over. And of course, this would leave some questions as to how they're identifying targets. Could the AI system possibly misidentify civilians or even Ukrainian soldiers as targets and then carry out strikes on the wrong target? So I think there's a real possibility here that this may not go as well for the Ukrainians as they think it will. But it's interesting. And also, this is a sale that was financed by the Department of Defense. That was made clear. And so what isn't clear to me is if that was financed by the Department of Defense under Trump or under Biden. It's possible these were USAI, yeah, I believe that's it, the Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative, which was funds appropriated by Congress for the Pentagon to buy weapons for Ukraine. And so a lot of those sales do take months and months to get ready, even if, the contracts are awarded even a year in advance. The weapons may not reach Ukraine until on down the line. So it's possible that this was financed by the Biden administration. I have been trying to reach out from the State Department or get a quote from somebody within the Trump administration on if the Trump administration is financing any weapons for Ukraine. Because we have a second thing here. Zelensky says U.S. and Ukraine agree to large-scale arms deals. So the Ukrainian President Zelensky said Kiev has inked major arms agreements with the U.S. This is what he said in his nightly address on Wednesday. Today, I also agreed on the main principles of our agreement with America, Ukraine, the United States on arms, large-scale agreements. I talked about them with President Trump, and I very, very much hope that we will be able to implement all of this. This will definitely strengthen both of our countries and therefore our allies and partners. Zelensky did not provide details on what arms will be sold to Ukraine or how Kiev would pay for the weapons. Ukraine has relied on the largesse of the U.S. and NATO allies to fund its government and arm its troops. However, President Donald Trump has been critical of Joe Biden administration's policy of transferring arms to Ukraine for free. Since Trump returned to office, Kiev, Washington, and NATO have developed multiple schemes to keep arms to Ukraine flowing without the U.S. paying for the weapons with military assistance. NATO has agreed to buy $10 billion in American arms for Ukraine. Additionally, Trump and Zelensky signed a mineral agreement that would see the U.S. sell weapons to Ukraine funded by the profits from sales of Ukrainian natural resources. Last week, the Trump administration approved a series of arms deals with Ukraine totaling $650 million. It's unclear if those sales are a part of the large-scale deals discussed by Zelensky, and of course how those would be paid for as well. Another way they're paying for weapons is by stealing the money from frozen Russian assets held in Western countries. So Zelensky restated that Kiev's goal remains to force Moscow to end the war. He said, right now, we need to add to force Russia to peace. Yes, Moscow wants to continue fighting, but the whole issue is in the potential. The whole issue is in the resources for war, in money. That's why sanctions are useful. That's why pressure can work. Now, the problem is the Biden administration was supposed to cripple the Russian economy and stop this war long ago, and the sanctions were unable to do that. And so I think it's somewhat unlikely that Trump will be able to sanction Russia in a way at this point in time that would force the Russians to end the warfare, and it looks like Ukraine is struggling quite a bit more. All right, this next one is from our friend Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com. He, by the way, was just on the Kyle Anzalone show, so if you want to check out that episode, go subscribe to the YouTube channel of the Kyle Anzalone show. It's the first link in the show notes page, and if you're listening this morning, it will be the most recent episode. So Dave writes, Trump says India will face 25% tariff and a penalty for buying Russian oil and military equipment. President Donald Trump announced on Wednesday that he will be imposing 25% tariffs on India and unspecified penalty steps he said were being taken in response to New Delhi's own trade barriers as well as its relationship with Russia. The announcement came after the president had been threatening to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's trading partners if a deal wasn't reached to end the war in Ukraine. On Monday, Trump said Russia had 10 or 12 days to conclude the conflict, shortening the deadline he had set earlier. So Trump wrote on Truth Social on Wednesday, remember, while India is our friend, we have over the years done relatively little business with them because their tariffs were far too high, among the highest in the world, and they have the most tremendous and obnoxious non-monetary trade barriers of any country. Also, they have always bought a vast majority of their military equipment from Russia, and Russia's largest buyer of energy, along with China, at a time when everyone wants to stop Russia from killing Ukraine. All things are not good. Now, I think the problem with this is the penalty probably isn't high enough to get India to stop buying Russian oil, and if Trump continues to increase the penalty to a level where maybe India would consider to stop buying Russian oil, I think he really runs the risk of just forcing India further into the arms of Brits and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and, doing business with countries outside of the SWIFT, IMF, the U.S. bad dollar system. So this doesn't seem like a smart move on the behalf of the Trump administration. Now, this one from JudgeNap.com on July 28th, Trump not interested in speaking with Putin. So President Donald Trump said he was no longer interested in speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin and shortened the deadline he gave Moscow to end the war to 10 days. When asked whether he would consider meeting Putin, Trump replied, "I'm not so interested in talking anymore. He talks, we have nice conversations, such respectful and nice conversations. Then people died the following night." The president also shortened the deadline he gave Putin to end the war, saying, I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason for waiting. It was 50 days. I wanted to be generous, but we're just not seeing any progress being made. The president made the comments at a press conference with Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Monday, while Trump was in Scotland. Now, this is, I think, interesting for a few reasons. One, of course, is that Russia has been discussing the potential of Trump and Putin meeting in China in September when Putin is scheduled to be there. And so, Trump saying that he's not going to meet with Putin, coming as the Kremlin is discussing a potential Trump-Russia-Putin meeting, is interesting timing. Now, the other thing of Trump shortening the time frame here, as much as this may just be Trump being Trump and setting arbitrary deadlines and changing things up because he's unhappy, I do wonder if there is some concern in the White House that Ukraine will be in a significantly worse, if not a really bad situation when that 50-day deadline, which I think was around the end of August, would be hit. And so maybe Trump shortened it up because Ukraine is in real trouble here. They're losing a major city in the Donbass as we speak, and the Russians are continuing their advance. And maybe more importantly, Russia is increasing their drone and missile production capability and carrying out some pretty large missile barrages against Ukraine on a fairly regular basis. Next up here, this one I wrote for the Institute on July 29th. North Korea unwilling to talk with the U.S. unless Washington drops demand to give up nukes. So Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, said Pyongyang was unwilling to discuss denuclearization with the U.S. and would only engage with Washington if the demand was dropped. Kim made the statement in response to a report that the White House was willing to reopen talks with Pyongyang if it led to a fully denuclearized North Korea. So she said it is worth taking into account the fact that the years 2025 is neither 2018 or 2019. Any attempt to deny the position of the DPRK, that's the official name for North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as a nuclear weapon state, which was established along with the existence of a powerful nuclear deterrent and fits by the supreme law reflecting the unanimous will of all the DPRK people, will be thoroughly rejected. Kim, who is serving as the Vice Department Director of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, went on to say that Pyongyang would be open to talks if Washington respected its nuclear doctrine. She explained, I do not want to deny the fact that the personal relationship between the head of our state and the president of the U.S. is not bad. However, if the personal relations between the top leaders of the DPRK and the U.S. are to serve the purposes of denuclearization, it can be interpreted as nothing but a mockery of the other party. The remarks from Kim on Tuesday follow a statement the day before rejecting engagement with the new South Korean government. She said, we clarify once again the official stance that no matter what policy is adopted and whatever proposal is made from Seoul, we have no interest and there is neither the reason to meet nor the issue to be discussed with the Republic of Korea, which is the name of South Korea. She pointed to the U.S.-South Korean military relationship as the reason for rejecting talks with Seoul. During Trump's first term in office, he held 3 summits with Supreme Leader Kim. At the end of his first administration, tensions on the Korean Peninsula had dipped as Washington and Seoul had canceled war games and Pyongyang halted missile testing. Under President Joe Biden, the U.S. restarted military drills and increased the number of participants. Additionally, the Biden administration worked to bring Japan into a military pact with South Korea and the U.S. Pyongyang denounced the military bloc as an Asian NATO, and, Kim really reoriented Pyongyang towards Moscow and signed a defense pact with the Kremlin. And so I think North Korea just has less interest, less will, less they could get out of engaging in talks with the United States at this point. And so they're going to draw a fairly hardline position if the U.S. wants any kind of diplomacy with North Korea. I'm not sure that even if they did engage in talks, it would necessarily help out the North Koreans at this point. Trump's negotiating style seems to just be making threats, and if those threats aren't complied with, then he would take more action. Now, he can't really sanction North Korea anymore, and the U.S. is probably too tied up in other regions of the world to carry out any kind of strikes or military action against North Korea. But I would be wary of being on Trump's radar if you are in Pyongyang. I think, their strategy may be better suited to just try to build ties with other countries outside of the U.S. orbit rather than trying to improve the relationship in any way with the U.S. Now, next up here, this article I wrote for the Institute on July 29th. U.S. military anticipates large-scale casualties in war with China. A U.S. general said that any war with China would result in far more American casualties than the global war on terror. This is a statement from Lieutenant General Joel Vowell, and he is the Deputy Commanding General for the U.S. Army in the Pacific. And he explained at the Defense Writers Group last week, our assumptions for planning is that casualty estimates will be far higher than you might have seen or witnessed as part of the global war on terror between Iraq and Afghanistan and other places where there were very small numbers relatively in contacts who were killed and injured as compared to large-scale combat operations. A potential conflict with the People's Republic of China likely would result in large-scale casualties. Vowell went on to explain that the military would need to partner with countries in the region and deploy an updated version of the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital to treat wounded soldiers. The general admitted that he was unsure how the Pentagon would complete this task, saying, "And I'll be honest, I don't know if we have the full answer on it," he said. Last year, Congress was briefed on the results of war games between the U.S. and China in a fight over Tehran. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, ran the simulation 25 times and found the U.S. would lose 10 to 20 warships, 2 aircraft carriers, and hundreds of aircraft. CSIS estimates at least 10,000 casualties to U.S. troops, although some simulations resulted in over 20,000 injured and dead U.S. soldiers. The Center for Maritime Security, CIMSEC, reviewed U.S.-China war games conducted by multiple organizations, including the DoD and RAND, and CIMSEC concluded, in most cases, wargaming studies still showed that a China-Taiwan conflict featuring U.S. intervention would be close run and incredibly bloody for all sides. The group added that the general trend over time is for Beijing to perform better in any conflict, with some war games conducted in 2023 concluding that Taipei would surrender within months. Unlike Ukraine, because of the location on Taiwan, the U.S. would not be able to aid Taipei without direct involvement of American troops. Vowell warns that the only way to avoid a catastrophic crisis is to avoid war with China. And so the ultimate goal here, ladies and gentlemen, is no war, Vowell said. It would be catastrophic on a humanitarian scale, civilians and military alike. It'd be catastrophic on global economic scale. And so medically, we practice what to do to protect the triage and evacuate our soldiers. I think we've got work to do there. However, Washington has been moving closer to war with Beijing since President Barack Obama began the pivot to Asia. Under that policy, the U.S. began its largest military buildup since World War II in the Indo-Pacific. During his first administration, President Donald Trump further escalated tensions with China by launching a large-scale trade war with Beijing. President Joe Biden continued the trend by saying multiple times that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked. All right, so let's move on here to Gaza, where we got just a lot of bad news. First story up here. 2 Israeli human rights groups say Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. This is another one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, published on July 28th. 2 leading Israeli human rights organizations, B'Tselem and the Physicians for Human Rights Israel, PHRI, issued reports on Monday that concluded Israel is committing the crime of genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. The reports mark the first time that Israeli rights groups have stated that Israel is conducting a genocide, a conclusion that has been reached by many international rights organizations and genocide scholars. And so this is what B'Tselem said in its report titled Our Genocide, an examination of Israel's policy in the Gaza Strip and its horrific outcomes, together with statements by senior Israeli politicians and military commanders about the goals of the attack, leads to the unequivocal conclusion that Israel is taking coordinated action to intentionally destroy Palestinian society in the Gaza Strip. In other words, Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And so that is absolutely damning. Now, while Trump doesn't seem to in any way be reversing the special relationship the U.S. has with Israel, he is acknowledging that starvation is going on in Israel, even as top Israeli officials, including Benjamin Netanyahu, continue to deny it. Dave DeCamp writes, President Trump acknowledged on Monday there is real starvation in the Gaza Strip, comments that come after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed there was no starvation, despite the daily malnutrition deaths that have been caused by the U.S. and Israeli-backed siege. So the real starvation stuff, I see it. You can't fake that, the president told reporters while meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at Trump's golf course in Scotland. Trump said the U.S. will become even more involved with getting aid into Gaza. However, the current U.S. aid system, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, has created death traps for Palestinians as they are regularly gunned down by the Israeli military near GHF sites. Earlier in the day, Trump was asked if he agreed with Netanyahu's claim that there was no starvation in Gaza and replied, based on television, I would say not particularly because those children look very hungry. In other comments, Trump said Israel has a lot of responsibility for the starvation and must work to get more food into Gaza, but certainly isn't willing to force Israel to do it. And so who knows that this is just a little bit of rhetoric. So let's talk a little bit more about the GHF. This is another story from Dave DeCamp, July 29th, antiwar.com. Green Beret, who worked for GHF in Gaza, says the U.S. is complicit in genocide. So the U.S. is complicit in Israel's genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, according to Anthony Aguilar, a retired Green Beret who served in the U.S. Army for 25 years and worked in Gaza for the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Aguilar has blown the whistle on the GHF after witnessing Israeli soldiers and U.S. contractors fire on crowds of unarmed and hungry Palestinians at GHF sites. What I witnessed in Gaza, I can only describe as dystopian, post-apocalyptic wasteland, he told Democracy Now! In an interview that aired on Tuesday, adding, we the United States are complicit, we are involved hand in hand in the atrocity and the genocide that is currently undergoing in Gaza. In a conversation with U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Aguilar recalled a young boy who trekked miles to reach a GHF site with no shoes and picked up what little food supplies he could find on the ground. He was thankful for even that. Then he walked up to me and I beckoned him over to come forward, and he grabbed my hand and kissed my hand and he said, "Thank you." After the boy, whose name is Amir, left the GHF site, Aguilar said he was killed by the IDF. The IDF opened up with machine gun fire into the crowd to get them to leave faster, to get them to hurry, shooting at their foot, shooting over their heads, shooting into the berm. So I ran up to the berm to look, and there were dead Palestinians. He was one of them, Aguilar said, pointing to a photo of Amir. In a recent interview with the BBC, Aguilar said that he witnessed IDF troops fire tank rounds and artillery shells into crowds of unarmed Palestinians. Aguilar told Democracy Now! That the 4 GHF sites in Gaza were set up so that unarmed crowds of Palestinians were forced to walk through combat zones. The sites were designed to lure, bait, aid, and kill, he said, adding that there weren't distributing nearly enough food for Gaza's starving population. He told Senator Van Hollen that during his 25-year Army career, he served 12 combat deployments, including Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. He told the BBC that he never witnessed the level of brutality that he saw in Gaza. The GHF has accused Aguilar of lying and claims that he was fired, but Aguilar denies the accusation and say he terminated his own contract. I wasn't fired, I resigned because I could no longer be a part of it. Van Hollen and 20 other Senate Democrats sent a letter to Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Monday, urging the U.S. to cut off funding for the GHF and support pre-existing UN-led aid channels. But that seems unlikely to happen from Israel, and the U.S. under Trump seems to be set on providing more support to the GHF, not less. So the Global Hunger Monitor says the worst case scenario of famine is playing out in Gaza. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC, this is like kind of the global group that says if there's famine or what level of hunger there is. And they said in an alert on Tuesday that the worst case scenario of famine is currently playing out in Gaza Strip due to the U.S.-backed Israeli siege on the Palestinian territory. The alert comes after the Gaza Health Ministry has reported dozens of starvation deaths over the past week, and photos of emaciated children have increased international pressure on Israel to ease the blockade. The IPC said, mounting evidence shows that widespread starvation, malnutrition, and disease are driving a rise in hunger-related deaths. Latest data indicates that famine thresholds have been reached for food consumption in most of the Gaza Strip and for acute malnutrition in Gaza City. The IPC said that the unrestricted flow of humanitarian aid and ceasefire were needed to prevent further catastrophe. The statement said, immediate action must be taken to alleviate the catastrophic suffering of the people in Gaza. This includes the scaling up of the flow of goods, restoring basic services, and ensuring safe, unimpeded access to sufficient life-saving assistance. None of this is possible unless there is a ceasefire. The IPC also criticized the U.S. and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which established 4 aid distribution sites in Gaza and have been called death traps. The IPC said reaching these distribution points requires long, high-risk journeys with unequal access across governance. Operating on first-come, first-served basis, the most vulnerable groups are largely unable to access the food. The IPC's alert stopped short of a formal famine declaration since the group lacks access to make that determination, but independent experts say it's clear famine is already taking place. And this is what Alex DeWall, author of Mass Starvation, The History and Future of Famines, told the Associated Press. Just as family physician can often diagnose a patient she's familiar with based on the visible symptoms without having to send samples to a lab and wait for results, so too can we interpret Gaza's symptoms. This is famine. All right, next up here, this policy is drawing the rebuke from some Republicans, including Marjorie Taylor Greene. She recently posted on X, "I can unequivocally say what is happening in Gaza is horrific." So I wrote this one up for the Institute on July 29th. She said, "I can unequivocally say what happened to innocent people in Israel on October 7th was horrific, just as I can unequivocally say that what has been happening to the innocent people and the children in Gaza is horrific. This war and humanitarian crisis must end." The statement from Green is one of the strongest criticisms of Israel from an elected American official, and she is one of the only Republicans to issue any rebukes of Tel Aviv's brutal onslaught in Gaza. In another post, she referred to Israel's policy in Gaza as a genocide. "It is the most truthful and easiest thing to say that October 7th in Israel was horrific and all hostages must be returned, but so is the genocide, humanitarian crisis, and starvation happening in Gaza." Now, you have a lot of Republicans who are still really bad on this issue, but I think it is notable that Green made that statement. So next up, dozens of news agencies demand access to Gaza. I wrote this one for JudgeNat.com. The letter from the news agencies said, "We stand together to honor their courage and sacrifice and call on Israeli authorities to allow any journalists and their families who wish to leave Gaza to do so. Israel must allow other journalists into Gaza. Nearly 2 years into the war, no international media has been permitted to independently enter." It was signed by 38 news agencies, including the Financial Times, Guardian, and the Washington Post. The letter goes on to discuss how the Israeli onslaught in Gaza has been deadly for Palestinian journalists covering the genocide. The deaths among journalists toll among journalists has been staggering, almost incomprehensible. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, more than 186 have lost their lives in 22 months. Some were killed while working, others died alongside their families as they sheltered from the bombardment. Without them, what we know about the conflict would not have reached the outside world. The Gaza Media Office reports that the number of murdered journalists sits at over 230. Last week, Wala al-Jabbar was killed along with her husband and 4 children, becoming the 231st journalist killed since October 7, 2023. The letter explains that the killing of a large number of journalists is preventing the world from witnessing the crimes committed in Gaza. As local reporters are killed, they face threats of starvation or try to flee. The world will be systematically cut off from witnessing what is happening. This cannot be allowed to happen. The statement follows a letter from 4 Western news agencies warning that their local reporters in the Strip were starving. So this is from the AFP, AP, Reuters, and the BBC. "We are desperately concerned for our journalists in Gaza who are increasingly unable to feed themselves or their families. For many months, these independent journalists have been the world's eyes and ears on the ground in Gaza. They are now facing the same dire circumstances as those they are covering." So less news is getting out of Gaza. And of course, this seems to be intentional for Israel to cover up their crime of genocide that they are carrying out. Next up, another article I wrote for JudgeNap.com, this one on July 30th. Netanyahu unfavorability at all-time high with Americans. So his unfavorability has ticked up to 52%. In about 2018 or 2020, that number was only 27%. And that was really as high as it had been throughout the time that they were conducting this poll and asking this question all the way back to 1997. Now, additionally, and very importantly, only 32% of Americans actually support what Israel is doing in Gaza at this point. The number among independents is 25%. That's 8% for Democrats. Now, one disappointing trend from this poll shows that since Trump took office, the Republican support is up to 71%. That is up from 66%. So overall, the number is declining, just not among Republicans. Now, Israel is looking to annex Gaza at this point. Netanyahu has talked about that. And this has led some countries, now France, the UK, and Canada, to say they will recognize Palestinian as a UN member state when the UN General Assembly reconvenes in September. Netanyahu lashed out at Keir Starmer for saying that he would take this stance, saying that Starmer rewards Hamas's monstrous terrorism and punishes its victim. A jihadist state on Israel's border today will threaten Britain tomorrow. Appeasement towards jihadist terrorists always fails. It will fail you too. It will not happen. And Netanyahu is talking about annexing parts in Gaza. They're also, of course, talking about annexing the West Bank in Israel. And so I think this is why we're seeing these Western governments say they're going to take this step. I do worry it's going to just be too little too late, that there is no two-state solution at this point. So recognizing an independent Palestinian state probably isn't going to do much to help the Palestinians at this point in time. All right, everybody, I really appreciate you all listening to the show today. Just a reminder, again, we will be back with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show today at 4:45 Eastern Time with the great Kelly Vlahos. You will not want to miss that episode, so be sure you subscribe to the channel. It is the first link in the show notes page.